What need have I of living servants when the shadows themselves rise up at my command? Thaniel Tirgun, Duchess of War. Some driven or domineering souls seek nothing less than mastery of darkness itself, the ability to turn the very shadows into their agents and allies. These are the masters of shadow, commanders of soldiers as dark and insubstantial as night itself. For those with the force of will to enter their ranks, the very shadows serve at their beck and call. Shadowcasters are the most common masters of shadow, since they can most easily enter the class. Sorcerers, wizards, clerics, and even the occasional druid can multi-class just enough to gain access. However, few martial types do so, because of the demanded specialties that are far removed from combat skills. As you progress as a master of shadow, you gain command of an increasingly powerful dark servant. Your shadow familiar permanently transforms into a medium shadow elemental. It loses all familiar traits, but gains new abilities as your shadow servant. Should your shadow servant die, you can summon a replacement after 24 hours have passed. Your shadow servant cannot travel farther from you than between 40 feet to 130 feet. If it is forcibly separated from you by more than this distance, the servant dissipates instantly, and you must wait 24 hours to summon a new one.
As a standard action, you can focus your affinity with shadow to enhance your shadow servant, granting it one special ability for one round of combat. Your servant can interact with corporea and have fast healing. You can grant your shadow servant a special ability for one round by taking only a move action rather than a standard action. You can choose to use two move actions in the same turn to grant it two abilities. Additional move actions granted by spells, class features, or the like can also be used to further enhance your shadow servant. You can also grant your shadow servant a special ability for one round by taking only a swift action rather than a move action. You can still use move actions to give it additional abilities. Thus, a master of shadow who does nothing else in a round can choose to give his shadow servant three special abilities, using one swift action and two move actions. The shadow in your essence provides resistance to cold, and this resistance increases as you get stronger, until you have immunity to cold damage. You gain new mysteries or spells per day. If your shadow servant dies, you can summon a replacement 10 minutes later eventually, as you get stronger. A master of shadow can shape the essence of his shadow servant, granting it special abilities and qualities. In this way, the master customizes his servant to his needs of the moment.
At first, enhancing a servant is a standard action, but stronger masters eventually reduce the effort to a move action and finally a swift action. Even when a master of shadow has the ability to bid his servant to gain multiple abilities, any single ability can only be gained once. When you grant your shadow servant this bidding, it can perform simple tasks at your command, in a manner identical to the unseen servant spell. When making a full attack action, a shadow servant can be bid to make one extra attack. A master of shadow can bid its servant to deal additional cold damage, stacked with the cold damage that shadow elementals normally deal. A shadow servant bid increases its reach by 5 feet. A master of shadow can bid its servant to be quick, increasing the servant's speed by 20 feet. You are welcome in the Tenebrous Cabal, so long as you do not succumb to arrogance or seek to control your fellow members as you do your servants. Surprisingly, Masters of Shadow rarely become members of the Votaries of Vecna or the Nightshade Covenant. While members of the Votaries are certainly convinced of their right to rule others, they do not like the idea of sacrificing their own mystical might in order to empower their servants. Members of the Covenant, on the other hand, dislike the notion of mortal beings controlling creatures of shadow. Your shadow servant is your greatest weapon. You can direct it against foes without putting yourself in danger, or have it flank an opponent. As you gain greater power, your servant increases in puissance. Your ability to use it to deliver touch mysteries or spells makes it even more potent than it would otherwise be. You tend to discover your own proclivities for manipulating creatures of darkness, rather than learning from others. This frequently occurs as you research means of empowering your companion, or of summoning creatures of shadow. No specific training or rites exist to become a Master of Shadow. You must simply possess the proper mindset and the appropriate knowledge.
Continued advancement is emotionally rewarding for those with ambition because it offers an ever more powerful servant and increased abilities. You'll want to decide which mysteries or spells to learn in order to make best use of your servant. For instance, touch attacks are of far greater value to you than others, since you have a powerful agent to deliver them. You might not want to bother with other summoning magic, your servant likely represents more than enough assistance. You tend to view other masters with hostility, seeing them as rivals, although this attitude is not universal. You'll have to gather resources on your own or with the aid of trusted companions. Try to acquire magic that enhances your touch attacks. You're unlikely to need many other forms of offensive magic, and otherwise focus primarily on defensive and statistic boosting spells or mysteries. Keeping company with a Master of Shadow is rather akin to owning a trained snake. It might never turn on you, it probably won't turn on you. But you never want to take your eyes off it. Erin Caredren, Lady of the Second House, Parliament of Shadows.
The Master of Shadow is perfect for players who enjoy summoners and similar characters. It allows for the same advantages and abilities without losing the strange traits of shadow magic itself. Most Masters of Shadow prefer a life of luxury. They aren't necessarily debauched, but they swiftly grow accustomed to having things done for them. Most live in finery-filled manses or keeps if they can afford to do so. These complexes tend to be somewhat distant from nearby people due to the Master's poor reception in most communities. When given the option, Masters of Shadow prefer to dwell near enough to other communities to purchase what they need, but far enough for privacy. When they manage to obtain political power, most Masters of Shadow tend to be demanding rulers. Already predisposed toward taking servants for granted, they are convinced of their right to rule. Although not necessarily cruel, they simply fail to consider the needs of their subjects. The Shadow Elemental needs little in the way of care. The greatest known Master of Shadow is Lady Thaniel Tiagan, the Duchess of Or. She and her disciples, all lower-level Masters of Shadow, rule a small, independent province with an iron fist, using their shadow servants as spies and enforcers. Sanja Yuridin hires herself out as a bodyguard for rich and noble clients, protecting them from a distance with sentinels of darkness. Finally, Fallen Riz, an abnormally flamboyant Master of Shadow, is well on his way to becoming a one-man adventuring party. The Tenebrous Cabal and other organizations treat Masters of Shadow like any other members. Their activities on behalf of the organization and their mastery of shadow magic determine their place in the scheme of things. This circumstance often prevents Masters of Shadow from obtaining leadership roles, because their study of shadow magic slows down as they master their servants. Thus, a small but growing number of Masters feel the Cabal is mistreating them. Masters of Shadow are often bitter rivals of Children of Night. The Masters feel that the children practice an unholy or even perverse form of magic, seeking to become what they should instead rule. The children in turn believe that the Masters seek to control them, along with all other beings of shadow.
A Master of Shadow's servant is an unquestionably loyal, devoted companion. As the Master increases in power, the Shadow servant also becomes tougher, gaining special abilities. A Master of Shadow can focus his power and will upon a servant and make it do his bidding. When using a Shadow servant as a character, use a medium Shadow Elemental. A Shadow servant's base attack is the same as that of a cleric or druid, equal to the elemental's hit dice. A Shadow servant has good reflexes, and dexterity too. A Shadow servant gains resistance to cold. When the Master grows stronger, the resistance increases, and the Shadow servant grows to large size, and never increases beyond large, regardless. Soon, a Shadow servant can deliver touch mysteries or spells for his Master. If the Master and the servant are in contact at the time the Master casts a touch mystery or spell, he can designate his servant as the Toucher. The servant can then deliver the touch mystery or spell just as the Master could. As usual, if the Master casts another mystery or spell before the touch is delivered, the designated mystery or spell dissipates. Eventually, after the Master of Shadows' power grows even